Get ready.
Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to Gullcast, a podcast produced by Endicott Esports and the School of Sports Science. I'm your host, Brendan Hall, and we are making history today, even in this infancy of this podcast. Our first in-person guest. Before we get to that in a second, just want to remind you to follow Endicott Esports on Instagram at Endicott Esports, as well as our Twitch channel. That's at Endicott Esports. You'll be able to also see this on Spotify and our YouTube channel, also at Endicott Esports. But Hector, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit. But again, thank you for being here today. This is a big guest I go back a little bit of ways with, who works on some really important work in an important field of esports that doesn't, I don't think gets appreciated enough at times, but you've done some amazing work with some pro orgs. Please welcome everybody, Hector Melendez. Hector, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. And I had no idea this is the first in person. So
look at you. Hector is a renowned esports training expert, and we're going to get into all of that. I'll start off with this, Hector. Let's start with your journey. We all have some interesting baptisms into esports. What was yours?
So I got into the industry about 5-ish years ago. More or less, I enjoy gaming, as most people that get into the industry are. But I wanted to kind of figure out how can we make gamers more functional as a body, and be healthy, because my traditional background is in exercise science. So I've worked with traditional sports athletes, where the goal is to obviously a healthy body just means that they can perform better, and that's always the the most important thing. And looking at esports, it's everyone says, well, they just sit. Why do they need to be healthy? And it's much bigger than that. I always say that esports athletes, in a lot of ways, are high-performing office workers in the sense that what they're performing and what they're doing, they're clicking a ton, mouse, keyboard, etc. They're also communicating. There's a bunch of things that we can see from an ergonomics perspective that then, transitions over. So there's a lot of that aspect that people may disagree with me. This might be a little bit of a hot topic, whatever the case may be. But it's always an easy way to make that correlation to someone who doesn't know what the industry is, always using something that they might be a little bit more aware of.
Never really thought of it in that context of high-performing office workers.
Yeah.
How do you mention it, and you sit there for a second and think about how sedentary they tend to be? That's a really interesting point there.
Yeah. I mean, we all drive, but I wouldn't consider myself an F1 driver just because they're doing the exact they're just doing something at a much higher level than anything we could ever comprehend. So it's kind of, I use that same metaphor in that way. So it's 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I reached out to someone on LinkedIn by the name of Coach Dids. He actually was the TSM PUBG coach.
Oh, wow.
So I've, just happened to connect to him. We started talking. I said, hey, this is what I do. I just like an opportunity. We can discuss further, but an opportunity would just be, awesome. He's like, okay, we can work and work together. And it was the first time that I tried to understand what the industry was. He actually then mentioned the name Taylor Johnson, who I would say is a mentor to me navigating the space. And he's even one of the earlier people that have gone into esports within, our particular field of exercise science. And I kind of learned through him. And he forced me to challenge myself in different ways that weren't necessarily normal to, again, working with football players or hockey players. So it got me to start to think about the industry in a much different perspective while still using those same concepts and principles that I've already learned, 10 years prior. So I was pretty happy to have worked with him, worked with TSM for a little bit, and start to kind of get things moving.
Definitely. We joke about this sometimes. You're aware of the gymfluencer culture, and what you do, and in strength training. We see entrepreneurship being so just that spirit being so inherent, and similar to esports, where I think entrepreneurship and having those chops is super important. And part of that is understanding, where you are an expert in, right? And a good exercise I always say is, finish the sentence. Only I, right? For you, only I can do a lot of amazing things in esports, right? I guess my question here is, in becoming an expert, like how did you figure out that this was your lane?
So the first thing is I never consider myself an expert just because it's a constant path of learning, growth, development, etc. I more jokingly say I'm a jack of all trades but a master of none.
Same here.
Guilty as charged. Because it's esports, the esports industry currently, it's you either need a physical therapist or again a strength and conditioning coach or a mental performance coach. So sometimes you have to kind of learn things outside of your traditional trade in order to, I never say, hey, X athlete, talk to me about XYZ. I can't help you on a psychology level. I can talk to you about mental performance, imagery, breathing, why they're important, why we need to get some sleep, nutrition. We can talk about that, but I can't go so far into depth that now I'm putting myself into a liability issue. So that's more or less how I kind of navigate the space a little bit, and that's why I say I'm a jack of all trades and master of none. It is more because of that than anything else. And again, it's always constantly learning. As an entrepreneur myself, it's if I'm not learning something, I'm setting myself behind the pace of whatever anyone else is doing. So I always have to kind of stay ahead of what's going on, so that way I can keep up with the status quo.
Yeah. So let's get into the actual training part of this for esports athletes. 'Cause I remember one of the first times I think I met you. We're down in Foxborough. There was those boot camps before that Rocket League major, and I just the stuff you were putting those guys through with the hand exercises. I was super impressed. Like, what are the most important things for esports athletes to work on from a training perspective?
Yeah. So what I always typically like to do, and again, I'm not going to go too far into the science of it, but I'm just going to try to make it as quick as possible. I always typically write a needs analysis. And what that allows me to do is better understand how I can now present myself in a way that allows the players to get as much help as possible. So again, looking at like what are the potential injuries that we can see, whether it's controller, whether it's mouse and keyboard, the ergonomic issues that we're going to see because maybe they're tilting their head so far forward, or the way the monitor is placed, and of that nature, crossing their leg in the chair for 5-6 hours and then they complain about knee pain. Yeah, there's a reason for that. You shouldn't be doing that. But
right. I better stop that then.
Yeah. I always say, more or less, within like a lot of players and like the issues that they have, they're trying to smash the square peg into the round hole, and it never works. So like we need to figure out how we just change the shape to a circle peg and put it into the circle hole. So it's a little bit more problem solving than it is just like, oh, well, let's just go do this just because this is what I've done with everyone else. It becomes a little bit different and more individualized in that approach. So, before I even do exercise, I just want to make sure that they're sleeping, they're hydrating, they're eating well, because at the end of the day, they are cognitive athletes. No different than chess, no different than, even if you want to say, combat sports, so boxing, MMA, like they're using a lot of brain power and pattern recognition to kind of solve complex problems. So we need to make sure that their brains are firing on all cylinders, as opposed to like, again, they're just a misfire, and they're just hobbling, to the finish line. We want them to go right through it, as fast as they possibly can. So exercise to me, even though it's my bread and butter, is typically the last thing that I actually give to my players.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because for a lot of them, and this will be more generalized, so apologies.
No.
there's no way to sometimes connect exercise to performance. Or like the value of exercise and performance just isn't there for them yet. Like they don't understand it. It's like the player in football, let's say, or baseball that's, just gifted. Like they'll just outrun. You give them the ball, they'll run 100 yards every time, with ease. And so like they don't see like why I need to go into the weight room when I'm just outpacing everyone else on both sides of the ball. Eventually, they're gonna start to play players that have the same gifts and talents that they do. So now they have to differentiate themselves. Otherwise, they'll be the second string, third string, or transfer somewhere else because there's no room for them anymore.
Can you buy into it from the? We'll get into mental health in a bit, but from a mental health standpoint, right? Just the value of just hey, nothing that's really going to actually improve my performance, but just from the endorphin standpoint, right? Like I'm a huge Peloton guy, as I've mentioned. There's days I leave here, I've had an exhausting day, and I just need to unwind on the bike for 20 minutes, right?
Yep.
I mean, can that be beneficial for these athletes, just from that standpoint? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a study that I always refer back to that like players that have played for anywhere between 1 to 2 hours, if they walk for 6 minutes and they return back, there's, a performance like increase in that. So it's, oftentimes like, especially like if it's like a scrim, I'll tell them, hey, I don't care where you walk to. You can walk to the bathroom for all I care. But you need to go out for a couple minutes. Don't sit in here because you're trying to focus on something that doesn't need to be focused on anymore because it's already in the past. Now we need to problem solve for what's next. And again, just doing the simple things.
Let me ask you this. And I don't know what sports our producer Ben on our Overwatch team here. I don't know what sports he played in high school, but some of our best performing esports athletes here were multi-sport athletes in high school. Do you find that? Do you find that how like that stuff translates well? Do you find that those kind of athletes tend to make good esports athletes? Is there any correlation there?
I think there's a lot of great carryover. Just because in a traditional sport, let's say like baseball, you're communicating with your players, or football, you're communicating with the 10 other players on whether it's offense or defense. Having those soft skills, I always find is very valuable and something that I always look for when I see players. Is like, hey, I need you to speak up a little bit more. Like you have good ideas, you're just not speaking up, and no one can hear what those ideas are. So you're letting that pass by. That could have been an easy problem solve had you just spoke up. Whereas, some of the esports players that are just playing esports or left maybe traditional sports because they didn't have a great experience, and this is like gaming was like a new avenue for them. They just solo queue. So like they have their mic muted, or they'll just passive aggressively, type out a message like you suck, like, or you're trash or whatever, just go and do something. They don't have those soft skills per se. And, when you're playing a team game, you need to be able to communicate. Otherwise, how can you expect to win? Like, performance is one thing, but being able to get everyone on the same page is a lot better. You got to play as... You don't want to play as 4 individuals on a team. You want to play it as a team of 4 individuals.
Absolutely.
So, that's always the most important thing. So, the transfer of skills from traditional sport to esports, I find to be very valuable. Just like Urban Meyer, some like higher, top name coaches in college, they look for those athletes. They're not looking for just a football player. Maybe they played football. Maybe they also did track. Bill Belichick took Stephen Neal, who was a Division I, heavyweight wrestling like NCAA champion, and he said, "Hey, you have balance. We can work with you. Like we can do all the other intangible things, but you have such a base that we can't teach that will be way more valuable to us." And it was.
Best high school football prospect I saw in almost 20 years covering high school sports in Massachusetts was Chris Lindstrom, who's now the highest paid guard in the NFL ever.
Yeah.
He played tennis in the spring.
Yeah. Yeah, he just wanted to be on his toes. You know,
Right.
that I always, I work with high school athletes as well.
Yeah.
And, when I teach them in the weight room, like, get into a defensive position and they're on their toes, and I just look at them like, how are you producing power? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, that's the first problem. We need to be on our feet. Like, if we're just on our toes, we can't make the quick adjustments. But, like, knowing, like, that you're creating that spring-like motion will be more beneficial than being on your toes. Or it's just like standing straight up and just hoping that you don't get, pushed, pancake blocked, essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Are we ready for our lightning round?
I hope so.
All right, let's go. All right, rapid fire, lightning round questions. Keep them. We'll keep them tight. We'll make them very snackable, right?
Okay, perfect.
So, what is the worst advice you've ever gotten in your career?
My mom told me to become a doctor.
Wow.
Yeah. We joke about that nowadays. At this point, she's like, "You should have just been like a real estate agent." Like, 'cause, like the cost of like debt that you would have been in. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Oh my goodness.
I like doing what I do. So,
Well said. What is an unpopular opinion that you have about the industry?
I think we got too many hands in the pot and no one to stir.
Explain.
So, as an example, like we're talking, we were just kind of seeing, I think EA just allowed collegiate Apex, or like they're supporting it now. And I think that news just broke yesterday or something like that, or 2 days ago. This should have been already happening.
Yeah.
But I think there's too many, people in the kitchen, essentially, and they all have their own ideas to kind of maybe promote themselves as the best person to move up. Whatever the case is, I don't know because I'm not in that room. But it's hindered the grassroots scene. And you see so many, especially like Siege, doesn't really have a challenger scene anymore. Mm-hmm. Overwatch, I think, also is kind of in that similar boat. Yeah. I think Call of Duty might be the only one where like the tier 2 challenger scene is still very prominent because it's so ingrained. And Halo actually is another one where it's so ingrained. Yeah. Like Riot doesn't care for their challenger leagues in like League. They're just like, okay.
Prominent, and not only prominent, but if you remember at the Call of Duty major, the first one at MGM, first of all, you had 96 teams competing in that little State Street building in Fenway Park, which is nuts. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, the team that won, 3 of the 4 guys got signed for the next round of qualifiers by one of the pro orgs.
Yeah,
so
I mean, Omit just won. I think they won the Challengers championship a couple months back. Yeah, and the Breach signed three of the players to play with Snoopy to play at EWC. So it was it does happen because a lot of those players, the industry doesn't have enough teams for enough play. Like the NFL has 32 teams, 53-man rosters, so that's a lot of players. Whereas Call of Duty is 4 players, and if you don't do well, see you later. You're back down like in the minors. Let's say. So sometimes you got to claw your way back up, know, and it's a little bit harder.
I know I got off track with the lightning round, and I'm gonna get. You can tell I get excited about this stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me ask you, because you're an Apex Legends guy. What do you main as an Apex?
Lifeline.
Yeah. Why?
Just because I started playing the game as soon as it came out, and it was like, I prefer, because I like to communicate a lot more when I'm playing. I prefer to be more of a support because I can essentially take a step back and see what's going on the field and then essentially create the action that I think is appropriate. Whether or not it's right is a different story.
Cool. What is a prediction you have for the future of the industry?
I don't... Right now, I think that the esports winter that we're still kind of in, as much as people think otherwise, I think we will probably start to see things change in the next... I'm hoping the next year or two. Just because it seems like people are starting to truly understand what the industry is as more of a entertainment industry as opposed to, what Optic or Thieves think of. Like, yes, we are a, we're a lifestyle brand, but we have esports. Everyone wants to do that, but we already have teams that are already doing that. So
to be a lifestyle brand, they had to first be in esports, right? They had to first do content in gaming, right?
Yeah, they got into it really early.
Yeah.
They were an early adopter. You know, no different than like
Yeah.
those that streamed on Justin TV before it turned into Twitch. Early adoption oftentimes can hopefully help you, get a little bit of a leverage because you know the space a little bit better than anyone else. But I think that now seeing like, Call of Duty, Overwatch restructuring their franchise model, I think we might start to see hopefully the real esports that I think everyone has been envisioning it to be.
Yeah, that first mover advantage, that's what I love talking about because, if that was always the case, the advantage simply to the first mover. Sometimes it's a last mover advantage, but if that were the case, if it was up to the first mover, Apple would never have won the MP3 player market, right? So, what is a hill you're eager to die
on? Publishers need to get out of the league.
Wow.
Yeah, bold strategy there. I know. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is there's too much self-interest. To me, it's no better than any antitrust suit that you ever hear. It's they run the league, they run the skin program. So essentially, they're claiming a percentage of those skins per team, per game, on top of them claiming 100% of the skins on the skins that they also produce them. So it's like they're claiming so much, but not redistributing it to the league themselves. TV deals. And I'm not saying that they need to be on ABC or ESPN type thing. I know Apex has done that in the past in like early iterations of the Apex League. I think part of it is there wasn't enough viewership, which makes sense because you're not really educating your audience to what's going on.
Yeah. Last lightning round question. What advice do you have for people looking to break into this industry?
Yeah. We live in a world right now where everyone, even interns, just want to get paid. Mm-hmm. And I'm a firm believer in understanding your worth and your value. But if you haven't really done anything, then you don't have worth or value. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. Mm-hmm. This now becomes a learning experience. So use it as a learning experience as opposed to waiting, 5 years down the road and you're like, I want to do a career shift and I want to do this. And it's like, well, what are the skills that you have that can transfer over? If the answer is none, you're kind of in trouble because now you're having to relearn a whole new set of skills. I worked for free countless times. And most of it was just because in order for me to learn, that's the only way I was going to be able to do it. I can't just say, hey, pay me a lot of money and I'm going to learn on the job because most jobs aren't built that way.
Yeah, I kind of had that mentality, when I was, first starting to go to sports writer, like just say yes to everything, just get the reps, and be more concerned with what doors that's going to open for you as opposed to just the monetary value. And honestly, I would not have gotten to the Patriots at 25 and flourished the way I did if I didn't have that mentality. So I do get it from their standpoint, right? Yeah. Everybody's got to eat, right?
Yeah, 10 years ago, I moved to the complete opposite side of the country to restart my career as a strength and conditioning coach, working for free 60 to 70 hours a week.
Jesus.
So I didn't do it for anything else other than because I loved doing what I was doing. Yeah. So
and you knew in the long term it was going to open up more doors for you.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. So I was playing. You have to look at it as playing a long game, and that long game can take, that was 10 years ago. So 10 years later, I'm working with esports athletes. Wouldn't have ever thought that would have ever happened. Yeah. Or travel with esports athletes. Again, never would have thought that would have ever happened. Yeah. So it kind of lends itself to whatever amount of work you're willing to put into it, you will end up receiving it back later on.
I will say, and everyone's situation is different with what they can afford to do for that. But yeah, thank God for friends' couches in Somerville and Brighton.
Yeah, yeah. I lived in an apartment with 2-3 other people. Yeah, and I only just slept because I only used the place to sleep, and that was it. It would just be in the weight room, hanging out with athletes all day.
Awesome. So, I want to get a little bit into mental health. I think it's such an important issue, obviously in this world. what strategies, you advise athletes on in that regard?
Yeah. When I first started working with a team called Parabellum, who their main esport was Rainbow Six Siege, so they were one of the last North American teams to be in that promotion relegation system of what Siege used to be. Their IGL, again, great person. I still talk to him to this day. And, one day he just kind of said, I'm homesick. And I'm like, I get it. Like, you moved to Vegas and you're from Canada. You're living a different lifestyle. You don't have the traditional college route that most people 18 to 22 will have. Why don't you just call home? Literally, that was like how that conversation went. And like 2 days later, I said, hey, how was calling home? Because more or less, I'll use Discord a lot of the time, and it'll just be send out a message. Just make sure I check in to kind of see, like, did you do the homework that we talked about?
Yeah.
Even if it's just calling home. And he's like, I feel so much better doing that. Like, I wouldn't have even thought that, like, I was homesick. And it's like, well, yeah, because you've never been homesick. So, like, you wouldn't know that's the case if you hadn't experienced it. So, that's one situation. A lot of it is just listening to what they're saying. And active listening. That's something that I even tell players when they're communicating with each other is actively listen. Don't expect to essentially listen to then give a response back, but just sit back, let them talk. And from there, you can start to kind of hear what they're saying, even if they're not hearing what they're saying. And you just bring those questions up, and that then forms that conversation that you're having, that then they kind of start to see, oh, okay, yes, no, you're right. Like, everything that I've been doing is maybe incorrect, or maybe it is correct, or maybe it's a 50-50 split. So that's more or less my approach to mental performance in that perspective, is sitting back and just kind of being a fly on the wall.
Cool. We're coming up on the hour here. I want to give you the floor. Any last thoughts, and then also, where can people follow you? Where can people find out what you're up to?
Yeah, so Twitter is typically where I reside on a lot of my socials. You can find me Esports Hector. It's going to come up as Hectic, HECTK. Mm-hmm. That's just the profile name, but Esports Hector is the handle. I do have a YouTube. Again, if you just look up Hectic Performance, just because someone had taken Hectic. You can find me there. I haven't really uploaded anything recently, but I'm looking to kind of bring that back. And then Discord. Again, Hectic. If you just search that, you'll find me. I'm always happy to just, talk shop, figure out what your needs are, how I can be of best use and best help, and etc. And then the first question was what again?
And
Sorry?
just any final thoughts here
Yeah.
that you wanted that we missed that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I definitely want to see more people in the exercise science background come into esports, because I think that right now it's still so young. It's similar to the way Nebraska looked at strength and conditioning in the 70s. It was if they lift weights, they're going to be slower, but it's like, no, actually, you become more explosive, you can dominate more. And again, they won a national championship, and that set the tone for the way strength and conditioning was looked at. I think we need to start looking at esports in kind of that similar way. Like, we're at the cusp of something great, but we just need more people to come in to essentially start to really show that value.
Yeah, I love that you shouted out Nebraska football. I think the young kids, because Nebraska is not as good as they used to be, they don't understand what a pioneer they were in strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
I mean, my high school football team, we used the Bigger, Faster, Stronger program, right?
Yeah.
They were the first one, I believe, in the 60s to actually keep their students on campus during the summer to work out, and everyone thought that was crazy.
Yep.
But they were the first ones to have the $1 million locker rooms, the $1 million weight rooms.
Correct.
They are such a pioneer in that world, and it goes underappreciated because of where they are in the pecking order today. But yeah, I mean, boy, you're bringing back all sorts of nostalgia and how I kind of fell in love with football in Nebraska.
Like,
So
as a whole, like, it took, let's just say, like, college football as an example. College football games were happening in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
It took, let's just say, 60, 70 years for a strength and conditioning coach to be utilized as a support staff
Yeah.
to help the players. We don't have 60, 70 years to be waiting for esports, performance to really be more normalized within the industry. We should already start to look at how we integrate them now.
Awesome. Well, Hector, this has been a fantastic conversation. Long time coming. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming out all this way. I hope you enjoy your stay here on this awesome campus.
Yeah, no, it's been beautiful.
Awesome. Well, that's all. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Be sure to follow Endicott Esports at Endicott Esports on Instagram, Twitch. This will be up on YouTube and Spotify as well. And we'll have more to come in future episodes. But for now, thanks for tuning in. See you soon. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Be sure to follow us at Endicott Esports. See you next time.